Who do you think you are? No, like seriously, like who do you think you are? I mean, that is an intricately complex question, right? When you try to really come down to the heart of all the things that make you you, you'll quickly find there are a number of forces that contribute to who we are. And so much about who we are is strictly because of where we came from. To phrase it another way, who you are now is due to where you came from. Right? There's a number of experiences that happened in our past that has formed us in why we are the way we are, why we think the way we are, why we do the way, like what we do, all those things. But also the people in our life that have come before us, our relationships that we've had contribute to who we are. That ice cream flavor you tried at some random ice cream shop years ago that has now transformed your entire way of how you view ice cream. Everything about who we are today is because of what came before us. And that is especially true of the people that have come before us. And perhaps you don't see that any clearer in light of like our families of origins, right? We are who we are in large part because of our families and our parents and how they raised us. But our parents are in large part who they are because of how their parents raised them, who are in large part of who they are because of how their parents raised them, and on it goes for generations, right? We are all products of the families of origin that we come from. And that's not just true of us as individuals, it's also true for us as a church. So who do we think we are? Resilient Church. As you guys know, I mean, we talk about it for the banner and everything. Like, we are a local church plant that's only 2 years old here in Vermilion. We stand for this mission statement to form vibrant lives in Jesus that withstand hardship. We do it through our 3 core values. The 3 dubs is what we call them: worship, words, and work. That's who we are. But here's the thing. This church family didn't just get concocted in a vacuum. This didn't just poof appear out of nowhere. As much as I wish it did, would have been a lot easier. There's a story to this place. Because Casey and I were actually sent by another church, our mother church called Ransom Church up in Sioux Falls, to get us planted here. So there was actually a church that came before us that even led us here in 2022 to start the process. But even Ransom had a beginning, right? Ransom Church started as a whole new church in Easter of 2009 by its mother church called Linwood Wesleyan Church. But Linwood Wesleyan Church also had its beginning in 1963 by a couple that moved to Sioux Falls and started there, who were clearly a part of another church, who were eventually planted out of some other thing. You see that, and you just go back through the years, through the generations of our church family tree, so to speak, and you eventually get to our heritage that's found with the Methodist movement that just exploded in transforming lives for the Gospels in the 1800s. Nope, the 18th century, which is the 1700s. That always messes me up, right? Anybody else? And what you guys will come to find is that we are a part of a denomination whose story I think is one of the greatest in church history, coming really only second to like the first 300 years of Christianity's lifespan before it was like official in the Roman Empire, and there was this mass martyrdom for anybody who professed their life with Jesus. So we are a part of the Wesleyan denomination, as I've said, and I'm sure a lot of you are probably like, what's that? What? What is the Wesleyan denomination? I like to describe it as the world's largest denomination that people have never heard of. Because we don't know what it is. But what you'll find is that we are actually a part of something that goes so much beyond us. It is so much bigger than ourselves. And I think it's going to really serve as a way to encourage of who we are. So we are starting a new series today that's going to go through the month of August. It's a core values series is what we're calling it. We're looking at our core values and our mission statement as a church. So worship, living daily with God; words, learning wisdom and community; and work, leveraging your vocation for ministry; and lastly, our mission statement, forming vibrant lives through the lens of our Wesleyan heritage. So what does it mean for us to live daily with God in our worship? But where does that come from, theologically speaking, and through our church history? Same thing with our work. What does it mean to leverage our vocations for ministry to make the world a better place? Well, we're going to look at that through the lens of John Wesley and their history. So it's kind of it's serving a dual purpose, to learn more about who we are through where we came from, and to educate you a little bit on church history. Got any history buffs here? A couple. There we go. So y'all will love this. It'll be great. For the rest of us, we're just going to have to suffer through it. I'll try to make it as interesting as possible. So let me just kind of give you a flyover view, like in the next couple of minutes. What is the Wesleyan denomination? Where did we come from? What is our history? And like I said, I think I'm a little biased, but I think we're a part of the greatest denomination ever. Okay? It all started with two brothers by the name of John and Charles. John and Charles Wesley, they were two of, I think, 9 siblings, which is pretty bonkers, and they grew up actually as pastors' kids in the Anglican Church, or the Church of England, in the 1700s. And John and Charles were both inspired to similarly be pastors or priests in the Anglican Church. So they enrolled in the Oxford School of Divinity to learn how to become a priest in the Anglican Church. But the further that John Wesley in particular got into ministry, he started to realize how discontent he was with how the Anglican Church was doing things. Or more so specifically, just the spiritual status of the people who profess to be Christians, because all they did was went to church, called it good. I know, right? It's just like, yeah, things don't change much. But he was so discontent with that. He was like, surely the Spirit of God has so much more to offer than this. And so him and his brother Charles, with a couple of other gentlemen in college, so these are college students basically starting this up, gathered together in a small group that they called the Holy Club. Which sounds like, wow, you're just so high and mighty, aren't you? Like, who calls it that? But the whole point of that group was for them to go beyond just mere church attendance. They gathered together to study Scripture, to pray, to take communion together, and most importantly, to hold each other accountable to living out God's Word and living a holy life. Holiness was a huge thing for John and Charles Wesley. But word eventually got out. This group started to grow a little bit, and some of those people in the Anglican Church looked at this little holy club that was meeting, and they were like, you guys are ridiculous. Why are you doing all this stuff? You're so methodical in all the stuff you do. And so they invented a slur for this group, and they called them Methodists. Methodists, yeah, you're like, what is that? Apparently it was a form of like a highly methodical doctor back in the 1700s. And so they called them Methodists as a slur, but John Wesley embraced it. He loved it because it perfectly articulated what they wanted to do. So this little holy club that eventually turned into this early Methodist movement began to gain traction. Hundreds started coming to these meetings and eventually broke into thousands, and they started setting up all these little Methodist societies that met on Sunday evenings for worship and learning from the Word. And they broke into small groups that took discipleship to the whole next level that the Anglican Church just had never seen before, holding each other accountable to holy living. And they saw radical lives transformed to the point where sometimes, eventually, Wesley was so controversial in all of these new ministry settings that he was banned from preaching in any Anglican churches in the pulpits. So instead, you know what he did? Instead of saying, okay, I'm done, God, thanks for a good run, he moved the church out of its doors. He started preaching at coal mines. He started preaching in bars. He started preaching in open environments anywhere else that the churches wouldn't allow. And he saw crowds come in droves, thousands of people learning about Jesus and getting plugged into these Methodist societies for deeper and deeper relationships with Jesus. It was unreal. But what was just as insane wasn't just their commitment to personal holiness, right? Having that personal relationship with Jesus and seeing your life transformed. They wanted to see society change as well. They wanted to see God's holiness infiltrate the land, and so they made sure to focus on lots of social revitalization efforts to make the world a better place. And so they didn't just believe in, visiting prisoners. They actually sought prison reform. They didn't just care about providing for kids. They actually sought the reform of child labor laws. They actually built their own orphanages. They actually started schools for kids in poverty, and it was all the Methodists who basically provided the funds for this. Not to mention all the extra millions of dollars that they would give to the poor. And one of the deepest things that especially broke John Wesley's heart was the issue of slavery in that day. He was a staunch adversary to the slave trade, which was a very minor, it was a minority position to be against the slave trade. And he said it was the vilest evil in all of the land, specifically referring to the American slave trade in particular. Was highly critical of it. And in fact, even before his deathbed, he wrote a letter to a guy named William Wilberforce, who was worked in Parliament back there in the day, saying, you got to somehow make this stop. And then he died. But his vision would live on. So you flash forward over into the 1700s, late 1770s or something. This guy named, I believe, Francis Asbury. Oh, we love Asbury. Wound up coming over and was the first Methodist preacher in the New World, right? And when he started, there were only 300 Methodists, Wesleyan Methodists over there. By the time of his death, 60 or 70 years later, this movement would have grown to over 200,000. Okay? So they're planting Methodist churches all over the place, right? But as this denomination, this movement that kind of got more formalized and kind of got a little bit further away from John Wesley's vision, they started to get a little soft. And especially as the issue of slavery was starting to rise up, they really kind of took this position of yeah, we see how slavery is an issue, but we're going to be slow to adopt these practices because we don't want to rock the boat. But there was a small group of Methodists, particularly led by these two other pastors named Orange Scott and Luther Lee, who weren't content with that. In fact, they wanted to recover and rediscover Wesley's original heart for seeing holiness infiltrate the land for the purpose of human flourishing. And so they sought out and planted the first anti-slavery churches in the South and went on to start basically what we know as the abolitionist movement today. And that started to take wind, and more people were breaking off from what was the Methodist Church into kind of this little department that back in the day would have been considered very radical until eventually the whole nation broke out in civil war. It was Wesleyans who started that 40 years before the war even took place. And then, of course, we know how that ended. But then that little pocket that broke off of the Methodist Church eventually formed its own denomination back then called the Wesleyan Methodist Connection. And they would go on to see similar things, like the very first women's rights convention was held at a Wesleyan church in Seneca Falls, New York, in the late 1800s. Or they would go on to send thousands of missionaries across the world to see all of these extra social revitalization movements happen all through the lens of the gospel, transforming the world. And eventually the Wesleyan Methodist Connection became what is now known as the Wesleyan Church, of which we all are a part of today, whether you realize it or not. If you're sitting here, welcome to the family. And there's so much more I could talk about. But those are our roots. Because we believe that people can be set free from their sin. Not that you can live a sinless life, we all know we can't, but we believe that the power of God can set us free from the things that hold us down, to transform us from the inside out, but to also be moved out into society and to see the complete revitalization of the world, to see God's kingdom come nearer to this earth. That is our history. That is what we're about. And everything about forming vibrant lives is thoroughly Wesleyan. Thoroughly Wesleyan. So I get a little hyped up about this, okay? So we're going to take a really sharp right turn and start talking about what does Wesley have to say about worship. So this week we're diving into our first core value on worship, which our little tagline for that is to live daily with God. And I don't know if you knew this, worship is so much more than a subgenre of music on Spotify. Right? Or Apple Music. I'm an avid Apple user. I don't use Apple Music. I can't do it. I just can't make the shift, Mason was telling me that Spotify is such an Apple thing and Apple Music is such an Android thing. Not funny? Anyway, I digress. So worship isn't just like a genre of music that you listen to, and worship isn't even just what's reserved here on Sunday morning. Worship is a daily life with God. It's surrendering everything about who we are to Him, okay? That He controls every little decision, right? We don't just segment Him out to the music that we listen to or what we do on a Sunday morning. It's every single day. It's every single day. You see, a really powerful phrase that I've come to learn is that how we live is indicative of our worship. How we live is indicative of our worship. Because believe it or not, we all worship something. Maybe it's God, or maybe it's our work, or maybe it's our finances, maybe it's our family status, or our grades, landing that perfect job, right? And we might say, yeah, we worship God, we worship Jesus, but if there's anything that takes more priority in our life, often our life, the fruit of our life, will be indicative of that. But I love what John Wesley himself said. When he was quoting John chapter 4, he said this, that to worship God in spirit and in truth meant to love him, to delight in him, to desire him with all our heart and mind and soul and strength, to imitate him. We love by purifying ourselves, even as he is pure, and to obey him whom we love and in whom we believe, both in thought and word and work. I love that last sentence. To obey him whom we love and whom we believe, both in thought, word, and work. So in everything we think, it should be something that's honoring God. So all the thoughts that you have, even when no one else is looking, no one else can be inside your head, is it still honoring to God? And all the things we say in every word, are we actually building people up through everything we say and encouraging them? God hears our conversations. Or are we gossiping and trying to tear people down? But also through our work, right? Not just the thoughts we have, the words we say, but the things we do. Are we demonstrating that, yes, God is the center of our worship? That's what it means. And one of the practices in particular that Wesley really hit on was practicing the means of grace. That's a really fancy phrase for sacraments. Maybe you've heard that before. But what it essentially boils down to for Wesley is that the means of graces are special things we can do that just draw us a little closer to God. Here's a little definition of it. Means of grace are practices that Jesus did that we can replicate to ensure holy living occurs as a result of our worship. So you look at Jesus, I mean, he's a pretty good guy to imitate, right? Right? Yes, thank you. So what are some of the things he did to draw him closer to his relationship with the Father, in his humanity at least, right? He prayed. He knew the scriptures thoroughly. He served, right? And he also had spiritual conversations with other believers. Those are all things that we can also do to draw us a little closer to God's heart. But there's one particular means of grace, one particular practice that is, just as important as everything else we do that I want to hone in on specifically for the rest of what I'm talking about this morning. And it is worshiping on Sunday mornings. So, yes, a little disclaimer here. Worship is not just Sunday mornings, right? But rather worship on Sunday mornings with the rest of us, right, as a body of believers, is a little sliver on the greater umbrella of worship. Okay? So, for the sake of time, let's talk about this little sliver. Because what we do here in this gathering matters. And one of the things that we do in our worship is none other than singing worship songs. For some of you, it's your favorite part of the service. For others of you, you wouldn't mind if you came a little later because you hate singing, right? But why do we even sing songs in the first place? Well, let me illustrate it with this. Why in the world do I still have all the southern states' capitals memorized? It's because I learned a song in the 5th grade that embedded it into my mind for all of existence. Sacramento, California, Sacramento, California, Phoenix, Arizona, right? Surely you have the same thing. Santa Fe, New Mexico. We have all these things from our childhood where 30 years later, no, not 30 years, but 20 years later, I still have this song memorized, but I can tell you what I had for lunch 3 days ago. Why is that? It's because music specifically is incredibly powerful at helping us remember concepts. So for all college students here, for your next exam you're prepping for, Ryan, write a song about all of your physical therapy stuff, right? I don't even know how that would be. Work with Mason, and he could probably make it sound really great, But then, songs doesn't just help us remember stuff, but it also helps us to feel things too. I cry at the end of The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King, every single time, not just because of, Samwise carrying Frodo up the side of the mountain towards Mount Doom, right, to destroy the ring. That's pretty great, but it's the music, right? I can't do it, I lose it. Maddie gets me, right? Thank you. My other one Lord of the Rings nerd in here that would cry at the movies every single time you watch them. I digress. Music helps us remember concepts, and it helps us feel emotions. You pair those together, and it's an incredible tool for us to connect with God. And John Wesley knew this too. In fact, he was very forward-thinking in the use of music for the purpose of our worship. So he specifically reflected on how music can stir us up and to feel emotions in a special way, but it also helps us to remember certain concepts and especially Christian beliefs when we put them to song. So as the Methodist movement grew, and especially as they saw thousands coming to Jesus, and especially people who would never have been welcomed into the traditional Anglican church, they had to find a way to teach all of these new people the basics of Christianity in a way that they could remember. So what did they do? They wrote a bunch of songs. 6,000, to put it in perspective. 6,000! And they called them hymns. Who all here has heard of hymns before? Hymns. They don't make hers, they just make hymns, apparently. So hymns, if you've heard a hymn before, they sound really archaic, like we like some more of our modern worship, right? But hymns just seem very structured and kind of old-timey, and we hardly even understand what they're saying. But 300 years ago, what they did with hymns was completely revolutionary. Sometimes they wrote their own, sometimes they translated other ones from German language into English. But one of the other things they did with their hymns was they took some of the modern pop songs of their day, some of their bar songs, took the lyrics out, and put Christian lyrics in. I mean, that's a completely and totally copyright violation if they were to do that today. But they didn't have that back then, so they just went gangbusters, right? And so some hymns, a lot of the hymns that they wrote were according to the popular songs of that day so that the average person could remember them. So I want to play a video that would basically be like a modern rendition of if John and Charles Wesley were to be here today, and if they were to take some of our popular songs and put some Christian lyrics to them, this is what's going to sound. It's actually really legit. And I believe this one is Zed and Maren Morris's The Middle. Ever heard that song? Check this out. You've at least heard it. Let's play it, Kyle.
Take over, let your glory overflow. But she Holy One of Israel, Yeshua, you call me your own, hallelujah. Keep your vision clean. Who we are, for you should know hell is hot. So you ought to stop and go do something holy. He'll be back, yeah, he's coming soon. So stop being a fool. You should go now, get ready. Ooh, call me your own. I was so poor till I found your love. Fighting against all odds. I know I'll be alright, 'cause you're mine. Heaven is holding.
Pretty sick, huh? Like, I'd listen to that. That's essentially what John and Charles Wesley were doing. Taking pop songs that everyone else knew, maybe most of us in this room knew what those songs were, and reinventing them. So people who never stepped foot in a church before could grasp these concepts. Really sweet. So the music we sing matters, and doing it together as a body also matters. Right? So it doesn't just help, us being able to put some of these Christian beliefs that we sing about into our minds and so that we can feel them, but actually singing out loud statistically binds people together closer. You feel like you're more closely connected with others when you can sing together. And John and Charles Wesley also knew this. They also believed it was important for people to sing together. So naturally, they wrote all these hymns, and John and Charles published their own little hymnal book that had all these songs. But John, he's a very particular fellow. Like very, very, very type A, high string, like insanely organized, right? He's very highly opinionated in how things should be done. He wrote 7 instructions, like a little set of instructions for how we should all sing as Christian congregants, okay? So, and I think they all actually kind of apply to us a little bit. So let's go back. Let's read. What are these 7 instructions and how do they apply to us? So the first was to learn these tunes before you learn any others. Afterwards, learn as many as you please. In other words, before you go and you memorize every single song on the new Taylor Swift album that somehow has 30 tracks to it, learn these songs. These are more important technically, wouldn't they be? Number 2, sing them exactly as they are printed here without altering or mending them at all. And if you have learned to sing them otherwise, unlearn it as soon as you can. Isn't that funny? It's because what we sing also matters. And it was very, very clear, for them. I mean, they didn't have PowerPoint slides for us to read from, but for them, they needed to make sure they read them directly so that the teaching that they were saying and singing and praying were as accurate as possible, right? Number 3, sing all. See that you join with the congregation as frequently as you can. Let not a slight degree of weakness or weariness hinder you. If it is a cross to you, take it up, and you will find it a blessing. Translation, if you're the person who doesn't like singing, when he says, if it is a cross to you, take it up, he's basically saying, suck it up, it's good for you. That's basically what he's saying. Give this a shot. Try to sing with everyone else. Let your voice carry with them, right? Try to match it. And then number 4 is really, I love this one. Sing lustily and with a good courage. Beware of singing as if you were half dead or half asleep. But lift up your voice with strength. Be no more afraid of your voice now, nor more ashamed of it being heard than when you sung the songs of Satan. Translation, if we can belt out the words of Katy Perry's Dark Horse, right? Or AC/DC's Heaven, Highways to Hell, right? Like if we know those songs, should we all the more be able to sing fully and loudly here, right? But not too much. Because then number 5 was sing modestly. Do not bawl so as to be heard above or distinct from the rest of the congregation, that you may not destroy the harmony. Don't be that guy. But strive to unite your voices together so as to make one clear melodious sound. Oh, we've all been around people who were, that person. They were making a joyful noise for sure. But that's about all it was a noise. So sing in tune with everybody else. This is really funny. Number 6, sing in time. Whatever time is sung, be sure to keep with it. In other words, I'll just summarize the rest of that one because it's really good. Make sure you just sing with Mason. Stay on time with him. Don't go too slow. Don't go too fast. If you do, it becomes a jumbled mess and it distracts people from connecting with God. Okay? Sing in time. But lastly, and here's probably the most important one of them all, above all, sing spiritually. Have an eye to God in every word you sing. Aim at pleasing him more than yourself or any other creatures. In order to do this, attend strictly to the sense of what you sing, and see that your heart is not carried away with the sound, but offered to God continually. So shall your singing be such as the Lord will approve here and reward you when he cometh in the clouds of heaven. In other words, Sunday morning worship is not just Christian karaoke. It's us praying together to song. And those two things could not be more different. Christian karaoke, we're just kind of singing along to whatever the person up front is singing. But prayerful worship is we are singing these songs as prayers to God. We're singing these songs as outcries, adoring him for all the good that he is doing, but also confessing perhaps where we fall short in what we do, right? The lyrics are prayers. That's what separates worship songs from all other songs. They are ultimately prayers because they are written for the body of people to give praise to God. You look at the scriptures, and it's like this throughout, right? Right after God delivers the Israelites from the Egyptians, right? He crashes the waters down upon the Egyptians, and after crossing the Red Sea, and they're celebrating. The Israelites are celebrating to song. They sing a song of glory to God. In any instance where God does something significant, they often respond in song. The book of Psalms is literally 150 songs that were sung, both in praise, but also in lament, even during the hard things. Right? It is scriptural for us to sing our prayers to God in unison together. So this matters. So I'm going to go ahead and invite Mason up here as we close out in worship. And my hope is that this little sliver, right, worship isn't just the 1 hour we have together here. or the music we listen to on a ride or a drive, all that matters, right? My hope is that we can take this little sliver and go all in with it, to reconnect with God through it. Like, this isn't just something we attend, this isn't just something we come to listen, this is a way for us to connect with God together, and music is a way to just help us remember concepts that He is for us and never against us. We are who He says He is. Right? Or when we sing The Blessing by Carrie Joe, when it says, may His favor be upon you in every generation, to your family and your children and their children and their children, that is something we can memorize, that God is always for us and is behind us and with us, right? These are prayers we can embed into our souls. And then when we can really get focused here on making the most of this little sliver of worship under, the grand umbrella, it's going to spill over into the words we say, the thoughts we have, the works we do. We might be like, you know what, I can give God a little bit more. Perhaps I should start learning what reading Scripture can do to my life. I'm going to pick up a habit of doing that. I'm going to try to find some time of solitude to just sit in silence and just hear the music of nature and God's creation fill me. Perhaps, prayer doesn't just become something you do here on Sundays, but it happens every time you drive across town. Or anytime you get a hard text, you offer to God, help me deal with this. When you're in the middle of changing your kid's diaper that just exploded out for the third time in one day, right? That can become a moment of recalling, like, Lord, give me the patience. Because if this crappy situation is frustrating me, how often do I do that to you? Forgive me. You see, and now worship moves from just something we do here at 10 a.m. on Sundays to a daily life with God. But it certainly starts here. It doesn't end here, but it starts here.